that's just another feather in our cap in the state to be able to recruit.
So it goes back to why Victor's here. He's wearing two hats. He's telling you that, and I'm saying to you that as soon as you get a prospect, look first at the Center for Rural Development, try to see if they can help you in one of the mini grants and let you know if you've got a good idea. Secondly, it's good to have you, gentlemen, and all of those that accompany you.
Keep up the work.
All right. We knew you were coming, really. But what it does is you go to the college after you've been to the Center for Rural Development and say, hey, we've got these people coming, is there a way you can help me? Because again, when Victor made a really good point, he says we're competing with the world. That's true. I can promise you, regardless of what community you're in, if you actually have a viable lead, they're talking to somebody else too. Okay, you're not the only one. It's not like they just picked you out, and regardless of how warm and fuzzy they make you feel when they're there, there's somebody else out there that they're making feel warm and fuzzy, and they're looking to see, well, where's the best fit? Don't forget the community college, because they can be the game changer. Everybody else is going to be the same incentive-wise. You know, if we go to ED, if we go to the Center for Rural Development, they're not going to treat me any differently than they treat you. Joan, and she's getting ready to do her part, she won't treat you any differently. So everybody's on a level playing field there. But if you've got a community college close and in your community, and you should have, that can be the game changer. You know, is their ability to train that workforce, keep a trained workforce, get those training dollar monies that, you know, can get work in the deal. Now all of a sudden you went from everybody has a level playing field. You may not be geographically the best fit, but boom, all of a sudden you just, you know, moved up $500,000 of training money that they're not going to have, and they're going to come in more productive day one than they would have in another community. So I wanted to hammer that point home, that that's a big deal.
And if I could add one point, is when you're doing inventory, asset mapping for your community as part of a planning process or part of a strategic planning process, don't forget the people. You know, people are your biggest asset. So understanding, you know, as Vic had mentioned, what skill sets exist in your community today. What kind of jobs are you going after? You know, will you even have people to fill those jobs once you bring them? Or will you have to put in place some kind of a training program that might last 6 months, Judge, or it might last 2 years? So, you know, understanding the capabilities of your local workforce, the people you're trying to find jobs for, make sure you understand what kind of jobs they're capable of doing and that they want to do. And again, that's all part of the planning process.
And it goes back to the college. The college is going to have a lot of that data for you. And when you're going to, either it be a Center for Rural Development grant or a direct ARC grant or a USDA loan, regardless of which pot of money you're trying to go after, that collaboration that Larry mentioned earlier is a big deal. If you're a mayor, you want that community college on board, you want your fiscal court on board in letters of support or in commitment. If you can get your fiscal court to kick in $5,000 on one of those grants, that's a huge thing. It's a small amount of money, it's an 80-20, but when they look at that, they're going to say, well, okay, the fiscal court is on board with the city here. That scored you higher than if you just came in as mayor and city proper. And those of you that are on these economic development, you know, foundations, or you have those, you need to encourage them to do the same thing. And I'm going to hit one other thing that Victor said, I'm going to drive this point. Infrastructure is huge when it comes to recruitment. It's also the most daunting, hardest thing to get funded when you don't have a client in hand. We all know right now there are vacant buildings all over this state. So here we are in Bell County, and you know, we may have land, but if you don't have a road, if you don't have water, if you don't have sewer, if you don't have electrical that you can get pretty quick, and they're going out there looking at a prospective site, you're going to lose out. So politically it's tough to get infrastructure money because, you know, I was blessed and we were blessed in my county we secured, about 12 million in infrastructure money to our regional industrial park. I literally was beat through the face with a baseball bat over spending $8 million on asphalt, 3 lanes wide, 14 inches thick for 3.4 miles with guardrail on it. I thought at one time I was going to lose my last election because I was able to get that infrastructure money. Because it's not popular. There's an element out there, what are you doing wasting that money? Nobody's coming up there. They just put that road up to the bridge to nowhere, and they spent $10 million that the state's wasting money, county's wasting money. People are crazy.
Now there's a road to nowhere.
Yeah, but now there's a road nowhere.
Pretty soon it'll be somewhere, right?
Absolutely. Well, Thursday, as a result of that, we just signed a letter of intent with the Appalachian Wildlife Foundation. It's going to invest $25 million on that property. And they will sit and tell you, if it weren't for that road, they would not do it. We had a neighboring county that was offering to give them property to come to their county. They're buying our property for $750,000 so we can go buy some more property and develop another industrial site. So if we had not had the infrastructure, we would not have this deal. So you have no choice but to take that hard thing on and get that infrastructure in place. Even though you don't have a client there today, you've got to do that. So I wanted to hammer that. That's something that the foundation that Victor has been involved in, they've been able to do that on some of the smaller parks to get that stuff together so that we could fill them up in order to get another.
Okay, does anybody have any questions for me? Again, I'm just glad that this wasn't a spelling bee. Albie just called one day last week and thanks, hey man, I need you're going to be a SOAR seminar. I need you to session with me, look at that. Really what it was, imagine my apprehension today when I walked in and it said spelling bee. Anyway, does anyone have any questions of me in the back?
From over in southwest Virginia, Wise County, neighboring county to eastern Kentucky, and proud
I came
of
through
it.
this morning.
Very proud of it. Thank you so much, and very thankful for the opportunity to be here. In the Visita area of the 7 Coalfield counties of southwest Virginia, the buzzword seems to be advanced manufacturing. What's the thoughts of advanced manufacturing in eastern Kentucky? If you could just expand on it just a bit, if there is anything at all to say.
Yeah, right now, the Kentucky has the Kentucky Advanced Manufacturing Association, and I've not been fully involved with that group, but I know that they have done a lot of work. And if you'll see me after, I could probably get you our vice chancellor of our system. Dr. Larry Ferguson has been heavily involved in that, and he can probably bring you up to speed a lot quicker than I could.
Thank you so very much.
I think I got a little piece of information to add onto that, thanks to my friends at East Kentucky Power. The #1 export industry for products and services in Kentucky is aerospace. Advanced manufacturing at its finest.
Yes.
We are also the state that developed the glasses on your iPhone, Gorilla Glass is made by Corning here in Kentucky. And so, we've got a myriad of products that would not be possible at all except for advanced manufacturing. And we're in the forefront. Aerospace, we're 3rd in the nation behind Washington State and California. This is an amazing thing.
Thank you so much.
All right, we saved the best for last for a reason. Before you do anything with any prospect, even before you talk to the center and you go to the college, you need to have a conversation with the economic development cabinet. And Joan, tell them how easy it is.
It is really easy, Judge. Well, it's nice to be here today, and I know most of you in the audience, and I've worked with a lot of you. I think that one thing that all of the panel has discussed, and something we have to do, is partners. and our partnerships and our collaboration or our cooperation, sometimes we've not been the best in Kentucky, period, much less East Kentucky. But the Cabinet for Economic Development is the primary agency that does economic development. We do recruiting, we help existing businesses, we work with industrial foundations, district courts, city councils. And one thing that, as we were sitting here talking, I was thinking about on the regional approach, with one of our charges as a cabinet, it's our charge to assist communities with economic development. And like the judge said, that is a wide spectrum in economic development. We go from making sure that parks are maintained, working with utilities still to make sure that the utilities are there. Utilities are a big partner with us, and we have offices throughout Kentucky. We have one in Prestonsburg, one in Madisonville, and our office in Frankfort. But I think with and again with the partnership, I can't emphasize that too much. I think with the regional approach that Bell County has a regional park, we have 8 regional parks throughout East Kentucky. And some of the industrial authority members are in the audience, and we have an Ed that's one of the administrators of it was grant money through multi-county that came to create this. And I think with the SOAR initiative, I think that encourages more and more of the collaboration, and I think we have to be able, in order to do that. The Cabinet, we have a lot of different programs that assist with the communities and companies, and the way I like to approach it with the companies is say, Kentucky has a wealth of resources. Tell me what you need. And sometimes the needs are very far-fetched, and sometimes they're pretty simple. But on the community aspect, I think the big thing that we need to do is make sure that the information that's on our Cabinet's website is current. Because if we didn't know that they had the building site in Bell County, the Cabinet can't market it. And a lot of times where marketing, when I first started working for the government, most of the time marketing was we handed you a packet that had all their information in it and how to go to one stops and get to the Secretary of State. The packets are pretty well outdated. Everything's electronic. So many clients, they'll be on their site and they'll have eliminated 4 before they ever contact the Cabinet. So we need to make sure that the information that we have by community, by cities, any building that you have, any site that you have, make sure all that's current, because without the current information, we can't help you with and the recruiting part, like the judge said, most of the time, everybody is warm and fuzzy with it. And they make you feel like, well, you're sure on the top of the list. But if indeed that you do have a prospect, or you have an existing company that's interested in locating, we do have programs to help with that. We just helped the judge with a pretty good project that's actually said helped him. The Industrial Foundation brought them to us. We worked them through a tax credit program in order to assist that they create the jobs in Bell County. With that, we have worked with our workforce solutions. We work with community college system pretty well daily on different projects, and having that partnership and knowing, and most of the time, if you call me, I'm not going to be able to say, well, I've got it right now, I can tell you what we need to do. We try to take time, do our research, and try to figure out how is the best way to help the community, help the company to come up with the goal that they set after you've done strategic planning. Kentucky has a Bill Grady site now, a Bill Grady program now. It's similar to the LEAP program. There are 5 in Kentucky, and they've started this since 2014. This is something that there's criteria listed on their website that you have to do in order to be a Bill Grady. It gives you a little bit of heads up on one particular site versus a site that hasn't had any excavation or doesn't have a foundation on site. We work with all kinds of different companies, and sometimes it may be that the state can't help, but we have partners with the banking community, with the lending community, the Southern Kentucky Economic Development. Mason's in the audience. We work a lot with Mason. And I think that, the big thing that I think too much, but I really believe in my heart what we have to do. We have to be able to work together and show that we can do things. A lot of times we've been told in the past, just because where we're from, we couldn't do it. Well, that's not true. We can do anything anybody else can do if we have a plan, like the congressman says, work the plan, plan the work and work the plan. So, you know, we have a website with the wealth of information, and I'll be glad to answer any questions. I know it's been quick, and, but, you know, the big thing is, on a community level, make sure you've got the information listed on our website, because if it's not listed, somebody in Nevada that's looking to come to a better climate won't know that you've got a 10,000 square foot base. And Bell County, or a 300,000 square foot building that could be available in Cofields.
I want to hammer a point home. You have to have these incentives with the Economic Development Cabinet set up before these people commit. You can't come back after they've committed. And I hate this rule or law or whatever it is. It's a law, okay? I hate it. I think it's silly, but nonetheless, it's there. You can't get these incentives, these tax incentives, after the fact. You can only get the tax incentives if it is, well, if it weren't for the tax incentive, we couldn't come to Kentucky. That's it, is that. As long as you do it on the front end, you can get them. If you wait, if they start building a building, if they start, you know, if they committed to your community, you can't get the tax incentives. They don't qualify for them. It had to be that it was the carrot that got them there, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That's how the law's written, and I think a lot of that is because of, other than that's the way they decided to do it this way.
Now you see where I'm at.
Is that, you know, that gives us another avenue to help with bringing a company in, Judge, because we have neighboring states that give cash.
Yeah.
You know, it's hard to compete with cash.
Absolutely it is.
So
No doubt.
it's something that, you know, because if a company jumps in, you would have everybody saying, well, I created X amount of jobs, y'all didn't give me any money.
Mhm.
Why'd you give Joe some when you didn't give Albion?
I got you.
I guess that's a offensive.
That's good. I'll take that.
Okay.
Well, you know, that's a good distinction too, John, because, you know, a lot of people see these headlines in the paper saying this company got this much, and this company got that much. They didn't get taxed.
No, it's a,
They got a tax credit.
you have to create the jobs in order to get the tax credit.
And that adds up. That's another piece of your puzzle. Okay? You need to have all the partners involved. So if you take anything away from today, know this. No single individual and or group or elected official by themselves is going to make any huge change. We may, as politicians, step out there sometimes and act like we do. But don't be fooled by that, because it doesn't matter. It was a group, a collective group of people that were like-minded that accomplished that. Not one single office, not one particular group. So I hope, if nothing else, you take that away today. Any questions? Yes, sir.
How do you determine the difference between a future good corporate citizen, a dreamer, and a stakeholder salesman?
Well, first you go to Clay County. And you look at that particular, anybody from Clay County? All right. You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. Those same folks, I'll tell it since it's got brought up. How many know the Clay County story? All right, Mike Patrick, I know he knows it well. Is that it? All right, we got a young lady right here. So I'm going to tell it the Bell County way, and if I get it wrong, all right, you know, then one of you all sort it out when it's over, because we've got about 8 minutes left. This group comes to my office as county judge. They had an unbelievable idea. They were going to create 1,400 jobs. They were going to use technology that was going to combine, you know, trash and wood and coal, and they were going to produce power, and they were going to take all the solid waste that was out there and bring it to our county and consume it and make energy out of it. 1,400 jobs. Well, I mean, naturally, my head was popping off with excitement. Like, man, this is great. So I bring in our 109 board. I don't know how many of you have that. Some counties collect their own trash, and some have, you know, 109 boards that take care of trash collection, and they're their own taxing district. So it involving solid waste, I knew they needed to be at the table. So I bounce it off them. I mean, they've got PowerPoint, you know, big as this, you know, really elaborate stuff. Smart, brilliant guys. So we got through that, and they seemed excited. So I had a friend, fortunately, thank God I had a friend that was way up in KU who was an energy trader out of Louisville. So I called him and said, hey, I need you to, you know, come down for a meeting with me. Because I had learned enough to know that if you're going to produce power, you had to have somebody to buy it. So if there was not somebody to purchase the power, then that part of the pro forma, that part of the business plan wasn't going to work. Now keep in mind, they're asking me to bond totally at the end of the deal $10 million, you know, to put into this thing, the county, you, the taxpayer. So my friend comes down and we have a meeting, had the 109 back in there, and he basically threw a grenade in the middle of the table and blew it up. Made those guys look like those snake oil salesmen that you see. I'm answering your question with this story. So I back off. I pull away. They go to neighboring Clay County, who borders us. I'm sitting at home one evening watching Mountain News. Boom, big announcement. Manchester, Clay County, 1,400 jobs, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh God. You know, I'm starting to do a count of how many people knew that I ran those people off. I mean, you know, I'm a county judge, and, you know, I just shooed away 1,400 jobs to a neighboring county. I mean, what a dummy. So, next announcement, you know, it's like 3 months later, they're breaking ground on this thing. So I'm at this point suicidal all of it, you know. I mean, I'm not telling anybody. I'm like, this guy, man, you're stupid. About 6 months after that, the reports start coming in, the deals fell apart. Those guys that I was in the room with are now under indictment and are fugitives from justice. Clay County and Manchester proper, unfortunately, have been shackled with a couple $1 million worth of bond debt that they're going to have to pay with no project in front of it. So to answer your question, how you tell the difference between a legitimate, good corporate partner and a snake oil salesman is do not count on your own judgment to make that decision. Bring other people that are involved, either in whatever they're proposing or whatever industry that may be. Bring them in the room and vet them before you ever go there. Because quite frankly, a county judge, and I'm saying this about myself, and a fiscal court can be doomed. A mayor and a city council in Clay County was doomed in Manchester. So I mean, it can happen. So that is a really good question because they are out there. It's kind of like when you go buy the car. If the car salesman asks you what kind of payment you're looking for, be careful. If they come through the door asking you what your bond capacity is, as a mayor or as a county judge, that's the same question. So you better be careful if they're wanting to know how much they can get out of it. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I heard what you were comment earlier about we've got to think outside the widget factory box, and we got to work together in our communities to do it. Well, I guess this example, that was a big widget factory that ended up not existing. And it seems like some of the examples I've heard are a little bit more in that realm. I was thinking how y'all work to sort of develop sort of homegrown Kentucky businesses, and then if you could talk specifically about your public process. Like, you know, I know as we're transitioning economically, it's not just where we're going, but how we're doing it is really important. And I would love to hear more specifics about your public process for bringing folks together.
All right, the public process for bringing, I'm going to answer that backwards, and I'll have to ask you what the second question is when we get done answering this one. It started with the Center for Rural Development, and we needed to bring our community together. And I'm talking about everybody, all the mayors, all the council members, all the elected officials, you know, business owners, the foundations that, you know, we had, the economic development groups, Chamber of Commerce, everybody had to get in a run. Well, in order to do that, you know, you have to have money to put on a summit like this. You know, you got to feed them. You know, I found that if you offer food, I'm being dead serious. Good food. More people will show up for free lunch than you imagine. So if you can get them in a room and keep their attention, that's the key. Then you can begin to start having these discussions about how to change your community and go that direction. Because in the past, that we would meet in small groups. Chamber would have a meeting, Industrial Foundation would have a meeting, this group would have a meeting, fiscal court meets, nobody shows up. City councils meet, nobody shows up, never in a room together. When we went to the center and were able to get that money to host it, they actually paid for us to host this strategic planning summit, and we had it at Pine Mountain State Park. The fiscal court kicked in the 20%. So now I'm getting $10,000, I'm putting in 2, so I'm getting 8. Why not? Let's get everybody in the room together. We had blast. We had 200 and some people show up for that first meeting. It blew us away. Well, that started that seed of growth of, okay, everybody's together now. And we had Lori Gorkovich. Anybody in here familiar with Lori? She's brilliant. All right. Victor was the one that brought Lori to us. And I'm thinking the entire time, I'm not fooling with an academic. They don't know anything about economic development. So I'm going to, but out of respect for Victor, I had this meeting because we were going to pay this person through one of the next grant we were going to pay. So I'm like, well, I'm going to have this out of respect for Dr. Adams. We're sitting in a room, and what's the movie you had me in? Hello? Blew me away. I mean, she literally blew me away with how brilliant she was. And we hired her, and she facilitated these summits that we had. Came in, brought a little bell, somebody like me get to rattling on too long. And she kept it moving. And through that, our community decided what was important to us. So I highly recommend that public process consists of saying, we're going to develop a strategic plan, we're going to reach out to the Center for Rural Development to pay for it, and we're going to make sure that every partner is there. I sent personal letters and made phone calls to every elected official, to our chamber board members, to our school board members and superintendents. They've all got to be at the table, and somebody's got to call and get them to come and throw in the free lunch and all the show. So I hope that answered that public process question. And then what was the?
How the smarter opportunity to examples about developing homegrown businesses through.
Well, I mean, the homegrown Kentucky stuff, I haven't personally had any experience. Larry or Victor, I mean, John, I'm sure you.
Well, I think the whole broadband infrastructure projects that we're currently working on is going to bring a lot of opportunity for entrepreneurs, for the mom and pop shops. A great percentage of people that sell products on the internet are either one person or at least less than 10 person shops. Once you put a website out there, you're on the same playing field with the Amazons and the IBMs and the Googles. We can get to your site just as easily as we can others. Just a matter of, is the product competitive on a global scale? And in Kentucky, you heard about this morning. He's competitive on a global scale. He's set up shop in Gordon. So I think if you're looking for homegrown Kentucky businesses and opportunities for entrepreneurs to create and to run a business, we're going to have to get through this broadband piece. On the other end of that is a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that Larry made a good point. We when this economy started turning down 5 or 6 years ago, we said, all right, here's what we're going to do. First off, we're going to try our best to take care of the people that are here. Our current industry that we have right here, we're going to go into them. We're going to try to do everything we do to keep them. And if they need to diversify for their product or whatever, getting away from the coal, then we're going to do that. So we try to take care of what we had. Then we tried to grow the ones we had. Then we tried to recruit new ones. Then we tried to create entrepreneurs. So what we did with entrepreneurs is we hosted a 2-day expo and called it Sell the World. And we brought in a lot of artisans and crafters and folks that had little storefronts in downtowns and taught them how to take their product and sell it to the world. And by creating websites and Etsy and social media marketing, and we've created, out of the 100 or so participants there, we've created essentially 25 new jobs. And don't discount the fact that if we're going to create 1,000 new jobs or 5,000 new jobs in Eastern Kentucky, we've got to create that first one first. So as you go out, and I urge you as you go out to start recruiting business in the industry for your counties, is don't forget about the 10, 15, 20 jobs. You know, you don't have to have a home run out of the park. Create them, start creating them. As a result of that, you'll create other spin-off jobs, and it got to grow. But you got to create those first jobs before you can, before you can get 1,000 new jobs in the county.
No, amen to that. You gotta focus on smaller. I mean, right now, to me, 20 is great. I mean, that 20 is just amazing to be able to get, so.
Yeah, we're doing the Sale of the World again in June this year, so there'll be some stuff online too coming up about it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you all for a very informative panel. Mr. Combs, you mentioned the Power Initiative and these 100K planning grants that are part of that.
Yeah.
The Power Initiative is part of this larger proposed Power Plus plan that would, it has over $50 million a year for Department of Labor, workforce development training, and also comes through the ARC. And there's also this massive part of it, which isn't included in the Power Initiative, which would release $1 billion of existing AVA money, and that's abandoned mine land money to reclaim abandoned mine lands across the country. We have lots of those in eastern Kentucky. So this amount of money.
It's more about questions from you to our panelists about fiber to the premise and how we may bring that activity to the eastern Kentucky region. So, as Brian is making his way up front, I'll ask the first question of Brian. Brian, if you can, give us a little bit about your background and experience relevant to the SOAR broadband work study.
Okay. Again, my name is Brian Kaiser. I'm with the Office of Broadband Outreach and Development in Frankfort, Kentucky. Our office started in October 2010 after we received a federal grant. Our efforts are now in the closing stages after 5 years. Our main purpose was to map availability, accessibility, and speed of broadband across the Commonwealth. We also did outreach and awareness campaigns. We have worked with all 15 area development districts we divided the state up into 5 regions after doing one survey, and then worked with each one of those area development districts to work out a broadband plan for their areas. And then that morphed into 3 projects, one with Murray State University, one with Morehead State University, and one with Eastern Kentucky University. And we've also worked with Community Action Kentucky to set up internet access centers, because early on we realized one of the biggest hurdles for the state of Kentucky was affordability with access. And so we tried to set up some free internet access centers at the Community Action Kentucky. And I don't know if everybody's familiar with Community Action Kentucky, but it's a low income assistance solution for Kentucky. There's 120 locations that are open during the cooler months, and the main reason for that is they have a program called LIHEAT, Low Income Heating Assistance Program, and that's when the biggest influx of Kentucky citizens come in, and we wanted them, while they were waiting in the waiting room, to be exposed to broadband technology, and in all honesty, we didn't put any stipulations on it. We felt that if they were using it for Facebook to look at their grandkids' pictures, that's fine. That broke down a barrier of being intimidated. So we just wanted them to have access. And now we have 27 of those locations in the most rural part of Kentucky have computers that are donated by Commonwealth Office of Technology in Frankfort, and been a very, very nice success with that. But with that, we've kind of studied the state and realized that every part of Kentucky is different, both their people and the makeup. And but the real common factor, I guess, with all of our citizens, after doing a survey, we realized when we asked why do you not adopt broadband, the number 1 reason is they tell you they can't afford it. The number 2 reason was they said they didn't need it, and so that's where the awareness campaign comes in. But we had responses of people saying, I don't want an eBay or I don't want a Facebook, but we try to share that it's much more than that. It can be life-changing.
Ron, do you have any information you can share about Kentucky's position nationwide or worldwide about broadband status?
Well, nationwide, we kind of hover in the bottom 5. We go anywhere between 46th and 48th, depending on the statistic you're talking about. You know, if you're talking about speed, we're 48th. If you're talking about availability at 3 megabits, we're 46. If you're talking about availability at 25 megabits download, we're probably 48th. So we've got a lot of challenges, and we're mainly a rural state, and our urban populations have challenges too, just with pricing. But a lot of times in our urban populations, we've had constituents call us that tell us, I literally can drive to Louisville in 10 minutes, yet I have no broadband options. So that the problem exists in both urban and rural.
Joanne, I'd like to ask a question of you, please. If you could, tell us what you've learned about other projects nationwide that are relevant to the SOAR region.
You know, so I would make a couple of points about projects nationwide. The first, it has to do with the new middle mile infrastructure that CRD and the Commonwealth are developing that will be coming into the SOAR region. And the second point I'll make is about last mile. On the middle mile, the big new bandwidth that was discussed so much this morning that will be coming into the region, this state is really a very significant innovator in that space. We have seen projects all over the country that have developed that kind of infrastructure over time. Many of them were funded by the Recovery Act in 2010, 2011, and they got massive federal grants in the amount of sometimes 80% of the cost of doing it. What's so innovative about what's happening here is that this is a broad collaboration among public and private sectors, among different public sector and nonprofit entities, and it's a bipartisan effort, which frankly I have not seen in any other state, without exception. And it is a very innovative business model for how to do this in public-private partnership when there's not massive amounts of federal money, you know, to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars coming in to subsidize it. So this collaboration, I should start by saying, I commend you on, and as was also mentioned this morning, you're being watched very closely by people all over the country who I think are interested in replicating the model, and certainly being watched by Washington, because this is the first place we've seen this done with some federal funding, but not comprehensive federal funding. And what we've learned in terms of these kinds of projects around the country is that the central insight of this project, which is that you can bring all this collaboration together, aggregate all this buying power of all the different entities around the state who care about this and know that it's important for the future, and leverage that capability to attract private investment. That we've seen on smaller scales in other parts of the country. But we've also, I think, the key insight here that all of that public sector buying power can then support a significant infrastructure project that's important for economic development and important for the infrastructure over which our economy increasingly rides, and our democracy, not incidentally, central to this. That the public sector in collaboration with partners and led by the nonprofit sector as well can have a huge impact. So you're using a tested strategy, but you're doing it on a much larger scale than I've seen elsewhere, and it's a very innovative and important project. With regard to the fiber to the home piece, or the last mile piece, sorry, it took me a few minutes to get to that one, Steve. What I would say that we've seen around the country that's important for the SOAR region is, maybe my #1 message is, no planning or collaboration effort is ever wasted. Even if it looks like this is going to be a long-term effort, even if there is no short or medium-term solution that immediately presents itself. But every bit of collaboration on a regional basis, and every time new stakeholders come into a process and have a seat at the table, will pay dividends in the long run. And the projects that have been most successful in my experience around the country, both in getting grant support, but also in developing new strategies where there wasn't grant opportunity, are the ones that gestated for a good long period of time, because the relationships were built up, the needs became apparent, bipartisan support was built. Very hard for that to happen in a short period of time. Sometimes that takes quite a bit of working together. And that kind of effort and planning, I think, is well worth doing across all sectors of your community. That's going to include the private and the public sectors and the various entities that care about this area. And what that does is it hopefully prepares you for when opportunities present themselves, both from a business standpoint and from a grant funding standpoint. And I can talk a little bit more in detail about what that looks like, but I would say that that's my number one message. Even if it doesn't seem like there's an easy funding mechanism in the short term to build fiber optics, for example, to every home or business in your community, collaborate, plan, work with private sector partners regardless, because that will pay off in the long run.
Thank you, Joanne. Eric, certainly Connected Nation has worked across the country and projects similar to what we're talking about today. Tell us a little bit about what can make this successful here and some of the barriers that you see.
Sure. Yeah, Connected Nation's been very involved in broadband activities across 30 states or so over the last decade, and very involved in about a dozen here today. What we've seen is that everyone knows broadband is important, and that's a given these days, right? I mean, we heard Daryl Maynard talk about broadband, just like location, location, location. He's right about that. But really, it's what do you do with that network when you get it built? Because let's face it, there are places, there are pockets, but there are places even in eastern Kentucky where we have fiber to the home already. And so how can we support those networks' utilization and increase their take rates? Because it's all about, as we heard Brian say, adoption. It's too expensive and I don't need eBay. Well, it's not about eBay. So our challenge as leaders in communities is to expand that breadth of context and demonstrate, in my opinion, that breadth of opportunity. We've seen communities across this country organize themselves around the principles of what the promise of broadband holds. And that's the places, those are the places where we see the biggest impact. Because they look at, okay, our problems, they first look at what their problems are, their challenges are, I shouldn't say problems, their challenges are. Maybe we have a low sophistication, technical sophistication of our workforce. What are we going to do to confront that issue? Obviously broadband is a key component of that. So in my opinion, and so if you look at, and then education likewise, maybe you have underperforming schools or schools that are struggling in technology adoption. How does the community rally around those schools and support technology? Because when you invest in the outcomes, the technology comes with it. Steve Jobs has often been quoted as saying that the technology should be transparent. What the impact is what matters, and it's what is measured. And so we find that communities that organize around those principles are the most successful. And I would say, in our experience as well, that takes a public-private partnership. This is not all a government handout. It's not all a private company spending more money. It's about a public-private partnership, and I want to recognize Steve and Lonnie and Larry and all the others who've just been tireless in their commitment to establish this middle-mile public-private partnership. And I think from a last-mile perspective, it's going to take those local public-private partnerships to make the difference and really deploy these networks into communities.
Thank you, Eric. Before we take questions from the audience, Brian has got a presentation with some data and statistics that I think would be helpful for all of us. And right after that, if you would, anybody that has questions, and I hope there's plenty of them, we have a microphone over here.
All right, and this is called Kentucky, between a rock and a hard place. And, at least you'll remember that part of the presentation. March 26th, the Washington Post put out a very interesting article, and it was just talking about internet connection speeds across the U.S. and also compared them with the world. And the only thing is they used average peak connection, which we typically don't use that speed. That's like, speed when no one's home and no one's on, that type of speed. But anyway, it compares it across the board. So there's the list. I don't know if anybody has really good vision. Can you find Kentucky anywhere in there? Okay, so it starts, the fastest peak speed for any country or state is 87.7 megabits. And let's see, I think it's all the upper states, the New Yorks. Let's see, I've got it here. I can't remember. I think it's New York, Washington, D.C. is in there. But now we'll go a little bit closer. There we go. Okay, so Delaware is in there, 75.4 meg. Virginia, 73 meg. Then you've got Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan. Hong Kong being the fastest at 87 meg. But then again, anybody, can you spot Kentucky? Again, we're nowhere in there. We see Illinois at 49 meg, Tennessee at 49 meg, Arizona at 46. And then there we are between Iraq and Kuwait at 34 megs. So again, just very dismal for Kentucky as far as peak speeds. So this is some of our challenges. We're talking about challenges across the state. We have limited high capacity fiber, and a lot of that's privately owned. We rank 46th in the nation for broadband availability. And then at the 3 megabit level of speed, 23% of our rural population has no access to broadband versus 1.5% in the urban areas. Now, when we talk about the new FCC speed of 25 megabits, that goes down to about 70% of the rural area does not have it, and right around 46% of the urban population does not have 25 megabits. So another staggering statistic, again, it's about adoption. Like Eric said, only 30% of eastern Kentucky adopts broadband versus 60% of the urban population. And then again, the gap widens dramatically when you talk about the 25 megabit threshold. But also, we always talk about the download speed, but upload is just as important. You know, download is learning. Basically, you're pulling down stuff, learning, absorbing, whereas uploading is maybe doing business, creating, and being productive. So you've got to have it both ways. And this is kind of, just gives you a little graphic about middle mile versus last mile. And again, we have the global internet cloud up there, and where the Kentucky Wired project, the state dark fiber project, is in the middle of that. And it's going to be about 3,400 miles of fiber optic with capability of, you know, at this point I would almost say unlimited speeds. You know, we're shooting at 100 gigabit, but there's technology already out there that allows 400 gig to 800 gig. And, you know, what other time has Kentucky ever not just tried to catch up, but shoot way ahead of everybody else? And this is one of those times we're talking about world-leading speed.
And what would that speed be?
Well, we're talking, I mean, right now we're shooting at 100 gig is the start, but again, the technology is out there for 400 gig to 800 gig today. And this kind of gives you an idea of what we're talking about in speeds. And I often say, like, the orange circle up there is 1.5 megabits, and I say that's about the size of maybe your coffee cup, if you can imagine that. And that's what a lot of populations have across Kentucky. Some have 25 megabits, which may be the size of a dinner plate. But then when you start doing, you know, 100 megabits and 1,000 megabits, you know, 100 megabits may be the size of a platter, and then 1,000 megabits may be the size of a kitchen table, and then when we start talking about gigabit, then you're talking the size of the room. So it's just the capacity is amazing. I have a little trouble with this guy. Okay, and this is kind of, we just did some samples across the state of Kentucky, and just to kind of give you an idea, the same service, Eastern Kentucky County may pay $14 versus $11 maybe in the urban area. And the same with DSL and fiber, and it just shows you that the prices are drastically different. And that's a real struggle because, again, a lot of our citizens and across the state of Kentucky only have one option. And that's one of the things we hope the middle mile will help, is provide multiple options, which will drive competition and price. And then this is kind of what is Kentucky Wired, and it's all 120 counties, 250 priority locations, about 3,400 miles of fiber, and statewide. Then the locations are always going to be your education K through 12, universities, technical colleges, the data center in Frankfurt, and then CRD in Somerset. And then the partnership, again, is the middle mile is the public-private partnership. And Kentucky has really done well, and we've been mentioned in several technology articles for being a leader in this, and that's very, very forward-thinking, first of its kind. And then the partnership is the last mile, and Eric alluded to that that's where it's really going to take the local community leaders getting together, someone passionate in the area to really
organize the community to patch into this middle mile network and take advantage of that. And then again, the government and municipalities and co-ops will be a major player. And these are the partners that we partnered with in the public-private partnership, the biggest being Macquarie, and that's Macquarie Capital. And this is kind of their commitment, 100+ crews statewide, 60% local labor, 8 to 12% minority hire, and $175 million in state contracts. Then jobs, the construction phase will be through 2018, and I know that's very aggressive, but that's what we're shooting for. Almost 700 full-time employees for engineering, construction crews, field crews, fiber optic installers. And then jobs through the life of the contract will be 20 full-time employees for the executive, the engineering, maintenance, administration, and just the technicians. And this is our timeline right now. We awarded the contract in 2014, and then design was complete. We're still working on construction, starting that. Hopefully we're here soon. We're going to start. We're still working out a couple small bugs. And then initial priority fiber routes will be complete in the spring of 2016. And then all statewide endpoints complete by 2018. And then this is community strategy, and I don't know, do you want to talk about this, Joanne? Or is it your guidebook, or, you know? Sorry to put you on the spot.
No problem.
It's Joanne's specialty.
So I think available now on the Commonwealth website are a couple of different guidebooks for communities to use as they start thinking about local planning efforts. One is a guide to how to think about fiber in particular, fiber planning, stakeholder engagement, technical issues, business planning issues, and so on. It's a pretty substantial guide that walks you through a whole lot of steps that in our experience are based on best practices from around the country. And the other is a guide to the full range of federal funding sources that we know of. And every now and then we'll get a surprise, and some agency will initiate a grant program that includes some kind of a broadband element, but the major big ones that are not a surprise and where there's sustained funding over multiple years are all described in quite a bit of detail in the second guidebook. And the ones where we think the best opportunities are, there's sort of a step-by-step guide to how to fill out the grant application and prepare. But I would encourage, hopefully these are useful resources, you can skim the indexes pretty quickly to get a sense, or the tables of contents to get a sense of what's there, and then target the stuff that is of interest. But I would, for those of you here who are from communities, I would build those into a broader planning and local engagement strategy, and working with a full set of potential partners, including the private companies in your market who are likely to be some of your best potential partners.
And again, this presentation, along with there's some maps attached, but also the guidebooks will all be on the KentuckyWire.ky.gov website. There's contact information.
Yeah, and we have a few handouts here in front of Brian today that probably enough hard copies that tell a little bit about the Middle Mile project. Certainly not near enough of the community cookbooks or guidebooks,
right.
But probably, what, a dozen or so in there.
Yes.
So you've heard us talk for the last 20 to 30 minutes, and we'd like to turn it over to the room now for questions, either about the Middle Mile project or fiber to the premise.
Once the middle mile is complete, let's say it's complete in Ashland, but it's not in Prestonsburg yet, and they're working that way, can that Ashland go ahead and start working on that? They don't have to wait for the whole thing to get complete,
As long
right?
as it has the main pipe, should be complete.
And if I could add to that too, I would just say, you know, and building on what Joanne had mentioned, it's really not the time to wait. Because think of it like a water tower, right? In effect, states, we heard digital plumbing earlier today as a metaphor, it's really what this is. Think about the water tower that the state's building in each one of your communities. Are you going to wait till you have the water tower to build all the water lines? You don't have to. You can, but you don't have to. So as a community, I would encourage you now, you know, we've worked with over, I think it's this morning I checked, 236 communities on broadband planning all across the country. And it's all about community leadership. We see that very clearly. And, you know, there's some forms, and we would encourage, like Joanne, a strong diversification of people at that table. And it's not all Windstream's problem to solve. Amy, AT&T can't come in and build enough towers for all of us. even though we're going to press them to, right? What we have to do is look at a multitude of solutions, and that community has to be at the table. And I would challenge each of those communities that are interested to do so now and to start organizing, because it's not something you have to wait for.
Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, my question is Macquarie, have they raised all the money they need to in order to roll this out?
They have not raised the money as of today, because obviously they're waiting to come to contractual terms with the Commonwealth. But the Commonwealth is bringing $30 million of money to this project, and then there's ARC monies that are coming. But most of the dollars for this project are from Macquarie.
So they're responsible for raising how much?
Well, the total project hasn't been defined yet, but it will be, as the governor said this morning, somewhere between 300 and 350 million. So if the state and the federal government is bringing 50, then that gives you an idea.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
See, I was just going to follow up on Eric. I was going to wait till later. This
Okay.
is not a question, but it's an advertisement. But almost everyone you see at this panel, including Joanne and some others, will be a part of a conference that will be held in Lexington in September. And so there are flyers and magazines out on the front desk, registration table, and Broadband Communities will be sponsoring this. And it is about communities across the country who have taken the leadership. There will be a lot of hands-on, this is how it's done from countries across the United States. So just be aware of that in September, so 15th through 17th. So just wanted to plug that. Eric set it up. I couldn't let it go.
Kudos for Hilda to wrestle that thing away from Austin. It got stuck down there for a while, so we appreciate you bringing it to Kentucky.
You have a question, sir?
The broadband initiative, is it primarily fiber, or is there a Wi-Fi aspect to it as well?
John, you want to take that?
The Middle Mile Initiative is all fiber optics, which is without question what it should be. Fiber optics is like huge major interstate highways, and when you're talking about a statewide initiative or even a community-wide initiative, that's what you want. It's a future-proof investment that the Commonwealth and all of your communities will benefit from for a minimum of 30 years. Usually fiber is depreciated over 20 or 30 years, but it could have a 50 or 60-year lifetime. So this is big infrastructure that's capable of delivering almost unlimited amounts of services. It's at the ends, in that last mile, as we call it, although sometimes it's really the last 100 feet, or the last quarter mile, or the last 5 miles. That last piece is where you look for other technologies, including Wi-Fi. But Wi-Fi is usually a very short distance technology. If you have the fiber into your community, into your neighborhood, to your home, or wherever it might be going, Wi-Fi then helps you to receive and send signals in that last little bit so that you can be mobile with it. Does that make sense?
So this initiative is basically like a transmission line where you get to the distribution point and then everything else comes later.
That's exactly it. That's a really good analogy, in fact, and it gets you to the transmission point, but it also will, those transmission points are some of the most important community anchor institutions in the community. So libraries, hopefully schools, public safety facilities, the important nonprofits in the community, government buildings, and so on. So it's working at multiple levels in terms of the value it delivers.
Yes, sir?
If you're getting ready to start on construction, what, if any, easement issues have you ran into as far as the middle mile? And how can you relate some of that to the easement issues we have to the last mile as far as the last mile adopters? How can you kind of write the skirt tails of the project while the middle mile's going on?
I'll try to answer question one, and I may ask Eric to answer the last part of that. Macquarie and his partners, particularly Black & Veatch and First Solutions, have been, I'll say, addressing easement issues for the last 90 days statewide, and that countless meetings, hundreds of meetings with the Transportation Cabinet, with railroads, with telcos and municipalities, utilities. And Eric, I'll let you address the community piece of that, please.
Sure. You know, communities that are interested in this project need to get their assets in order. pun intended. Wow, my goodness, lighten up. I know we're here talking about technology, but please. No, really, they do. In all seriousness, communities really need to get their assets in order. They need to know what's available and what's not. Because how many people have heard of Google Fiber? Everybody, right? Everybody heard of Google Fiber. Where did Google Fiber go first? Kansas City. Why? Because they rolled out the red carpet and said, mi casa es su casa. Everything I have, you can use because we want your network that bad. And what has happened is that every community since then has started replicating that model, such that communities know what's available, they have a map of it in many cases, and secondarily, they have, in most cases, they have permission to use those assets. Some of them might be owned by the school district, or the health department, or the community-based services office, or some other public facility. So you asked Chuck about Ashland. That's one of the things Ashland could be doing right now. Who controls all of our assets so that if we need to hang fiber or mount an antenna or somehow build out that last mile, who can help us do that? And where would be strategic locations for that activity right now today?
So do we know how far along they are on the engineering? So we'll know, so that'll tell us what the permitting issues are. The railroads sometimes take up to 6 months. I mean, DOT, I'm sure that they're working with the state, quite easy access, but the railroads and stuff like that's going to be a difficulty. I know they tend to do what they want.
So most of the activity from a engineering and design standpoint so far by McQuarrie and its team have been a desktop exercise. We have not come to contractual terms, so they have done some early works. Certainly had lots of conversations with the folks that you just mentioned, but to date they have not in full force gone out.
So pole attachments and all that, they haven't actually engineered, they've done all desktop.
Well, some of the pole attachment agreements, I'll say, they're different. You know, there's 41 different companies out there that they need pole attachment agreements with. To date, they're probably a little over a third of the way done in getting those done, but there's still work to be done. Yes, ma'am.
Where do you start hanging fiber? Which part of Kentucky?
We're going to start in Eastern Kentucky.
Give us a timeline though of you know, where it's gonna go when, so communities can prepare. And I know you said prepare now, but,
some of it's going to be simultaneous. That's actually a good question. But we're not foolish enough to stand up here and tell you that we're going to be here at this date, okay? But this north-south route will have to be one of the early routes. The other early route that we will have to have is a connection into Frankfort, because all of these state office buildings out here, if they don't have the connection to Frankfort, they have nothing. So Eastern Kentucky is still a priority, but there will be simultaneous work going on in these other sections at the same time.
Yeah, and I think an important date to remember is this work is scheduled to be completed statewide in October 2018. So while we certainly will start in Eastern Kentucky, the entire state will be a beneficiary in 18. Questions? Yes, sir.
Once the broadband is completed, what kind of estimated changes are expected to take place in the community?
So if I heard the question correctly, it's once this project is completed, what kinds of changes are we likely to see in communities? That's a big question. I could talk for a long time. Let's talk about what we know and what we don't know. So we know that delivering services over fiber optics to really important critical community institutions like hospitals and public safety facilities, government buildings, schools, all of that, that is going to make an enormous difference. It will bring world-class services to all of those institutions and hopefully bring some of their pricing down too, to the benefit of the local community and of the Commonwealth. It will also, I think, in terms of the places where members of the community go to get internet access, when it's hardest for them to get it at home, which is always the case in rural areas, home internet access is sometimes not available and frequently very expensive. But the places where members of the community go, which is public libraries and other kinds of key institutions like nonprofits, will have the availability of service there. And that in itself is going to be a big game changer, even in the short term. In terms of what the changes will be beyond that, that's going to be, to some degree, dependent on ride that infrastructure to bring investment, to potentially create some competitive dynamic. And the idea here is win-win, public and private. So I know that's not a concrete answer about exactly what this will look like in 3 years or 5 years or 7, but to some degree, it will depend on how that infrastructure gets built out. And then I think very important point that Eric makes, how it's used. Because if it's there and the community doesn't want to use it or can't afford it, which is an awful scenario, hopefully will never materialize, but if that's the case, then it's just sitting there.
And I would just add to that, that's exactly agree with that answer. The one thing I would add is a little bit of Eastern Kentucky-ism here. We're a culture that if I've got it, if you've got it, I need it, and I need it better than you got it. And so I think that SOAR is doing a great job of helping us to realize, let's do something realistic. Let's start something in the hope of building something bigger than ourselves. And so I would somewhat caution all the community leaders here to stop and think, okay, how can I make this network something that's sustainable, that is usable by people who are going to use it, and then grow over time? Because I remember when I was 9 years old, my magistrate came to my house and asked my mom and dad to sign a petition to get city water at my house. I mean, I grew up on well water. And it took a few years, but when I was 12, we had city water. And it was because that demand was aggregated, that commitment to see value was there, and the people were willing to invest in it. And that's not an overnight accommodation. Now, maybe in some of our community anchors, some of our community anchor institutions, libraries, healthcare, and so forth, it may get on sooner than later, we hope, of course. But out in every holler and every nook and every cranny, I don't think it's reasonable to think that they're all going to have fiber cables, and then they decide if they want it or not. It's a little bit of give and take on everybody's part, especially at the local level.
How do you,
Go ahead.
how do you empower local communities and businesses to truly harness this technology? Because it seems to me like the opportunities are endless. Like this is truly going to open up Eastern Kentucky to the world, and it gives you so many opportunities to grow your business outside of the region and to let more people know about Eastern Kentucky. So how do you empower people to know what they can do, and I guess help them seek those opportunities out? Because it's just so different that I wonder how people will truly comprehend all the possibilities that are out there for their businesses, for how to grow, how to connect with others.
Go ahead.
Eric, let me help you out on that a little bit. There are so many, you're right, opportunities. How do you get people to hold on to them? And Eric touched on it already about if we have one, somebody else has one, you want it sort of thing. But I just want to put it in even a context longer ago than water. When they started, today we don't even think about electricity. But you wouldn't believe when they started to build out rural electric, people wouldn't take it because they didn't think they needed it. They were getting along fine with the lantern in the barn. But it was $5 a month. It was a huge investment. But once one neighbor got it and there was lights in the barn, and then once the women understood you could plug in an electric washing machine, and it just caught on. And the same will happen even faster with technology. Right. It's getting that demonstration, it's getting that hands-on, it's making it comfortable to them, it's getting two people to sign up or help to take it. So it'll be a community effort, and that's why the leaders are so critical in these local communities, to set the example, to lead, to preach the gospel. It's the broadband gospel.
And even that's one of the things we've seen in our office is typically the successful communities are all grassroots, a passionate person in the local area that takes it and organizes the people and draws in the public-private partnership. And
basically what we're talking about is awareness, and that's one of the things that our office has always said, you know, give them access, give them access, make them aware, make it affordable, and they will adopt. But this isn't one of those, it's not a field of dreams where build it and they will come.
Right.
It has to be an awareness thing. You have to expose people to what it can do. And you know, back to the point of the question before yours, you know, like with the development of electricity, Benjamin Franklin or Tesla, whoever you agree on invented it, they couldn't have known that it was going to power a heart or a satellite in space or an electric car. So it's hard to say what broadband will do because, I mean, we're in such early stages. I mean, it's going to be limitless, really.
You know, let's face it, this is overwhelming, right? I mean, this whole idea is overwhelming. And sitting there as a city manager or a magistrate or a county judge, I can just imagine. You know you've got something here you need, and what on earth am I going to do to get it started? And I think, like any big problem or any big challenge, at some level, you got to say, I'm going to do it, just like Kennedy did. We're going to the moon. How are we going to get there? Not sure yet, but we're going. And so that's where we are with broadband today, in my opinion. And I would encourage you to solve it like you would any big problem, one step at a time. What are the priorities for my community? Where can it make the biggest difference for my community? And those are the problems you start solving through broadband-enabled solutions. And that, again, makes that technology transparent and delivers impact into your local community.
The community planning guide that you spoke of, I think the community planning guide that was on the website,
Yes.
are there talking points and stuff like that in there that
Yes,
we could use?
oh yeah, there's two large documents in there. There's a funding kind of cookbook, find how to fund your project, and then two, just the community leader fiber project.
And Chuck, like in your situation, there's other models out there. I mean, look at Glasgow, look at some of the other cities in Kentucky who have taken this and set up a MuniNet, or look what's best for your city, what kind of services you want to provide, and look at some of the models. You know, Darrell, Chattanooga is a prime example that I think about as a city that's reinvented itself because of internet capability. So look and see what it is that you want your city to be somewhere down the road, and let's connect you with a model that's out there that's already working.
And the guidebook certainly looks at those strategies too, is, you know, with focus is public sector driven and public sector infrastructure and ownership, or co-op type models, because the co-ops in your community, the municipal electrics, all of those kinds of institutions are going to be incredibly important potential partners or drivers of this in the same way that the phone company might be. If I can add a couple of concrete things in response to the last question. I've seen a whole bunch of different strategies, some of them really low cost but very impactful for trying to show where the value is. So I worked with a county in Western Maryland that set up a program to have brown bag lunches at the county courthouse, where all the small businesses in town were invited to come once a month, and there would be just a 45-minute presentation of the things you can do once you have internet access for your storefront small business. It's sort of basic educational stuff that may seem very self-evident to some businesses, but for others may not be their strong suit, particularly if they're older. And that speaks to another strategy, because unfortunately I think the reality of this kind of technology is there's a significant generational element to it. And one of the key techniques, I think, for building awareness in your community is going to be that your young people are going to come out of schools where hopefully with the new program and the new network they're going to have some of the best broadband speeds in the world to those schools and all the assets that they need there to take advantage of it, and they'll be going home and talking to their families about it. And that's another strategy, is the schools can be part of the education process, because it is young people who are driving this market right now. Google Fiber is not building for people in my age group and above. It's building for, well, it's building for a lot of groups, but the focus of many of the fiber to the home deployers I've spoken to over the last few years is young people coming off campuses, thinking about their first homes, thinking about having a family, and where do they want to locate, what kind of environment do they want to be in, and will they be able to get the bandwidth that they got accustomed to on campus or in high school, or that they feel they need, even just for lifestyle amenities, let alone running a home-based business or working from home and so on.
Yes, sir.
One question with two different components. On the funding mechanisms identified so far, is there a list of them, Brian? I think you just mentioned some of that. Is there a list of the different funding mechanisms that the state has set up already for some of these projects?
Yes.
And also, is that identified for the federal components also? I'm assuming that there's going to be a way to bridge both pots on projects here for the local communities.
The answer is yes and yes, but I'll let Joanne, she's the author of the book, so I'll let her.
So I can't speak to state funding initiatives, but one of the two guidebooks looks at, as I said, the federal ones of which we know, and then as one-time opportunities come available, we are sending memos to the Commonwealth that hopefully they will share. And it's a wide range of different kinds of projects. There are loans available from USDA. There are grants available for equipment for things like telemedicine and distance learning, which obviously will be applicable only to certain kinds of users. There are different kinds of more modest grants available for fiber to the home in distressed communities and so on. But the guidebook has a relatively comprehensive compendium of the things that we know are out there on an ongoing basis.
Well, the add-on question to that. The different organizations that you're talking about, whether they're state or they're federal, are there field personnel that will actually come out and meet with the local government to try to help them find a way through that and find the right funding mechanism for their project?
A lot of that is in the guidebook, but in many of the programs that is the case. So for example, anything run by USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, there's a state director here in Kentucky who's very engaged and involved and is probably already in conversation with many of your communities and knows about all of these funding sources and is without question the strongest resource you can have on those programs. But the guidebook mentions, to the extent that we knew of who the right contact person was, that is in there, or guidance about how to find them. And I think you may have more.
Well, also, I would attend the Broadband Communities thing in September in Lexington, because you're going to make contacts, across the United States. You're going to make federal contacts. I mean, there's going to be several breakout sessions just like this that's going to be pointed just to your community. So I would strongly suggest, just going to any of these broadband type conferences. There's another one called Gigabit Cities that's typically in Atlanta, so but it travels too. But I would just look up those type terms, and you're going to make contacts.
Mark, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm with the Appalachian Regional Commission, and we do fund a lot of broadband type activities. We have a state office in Frankfurt. Peggy Satterley's our ARC program manager, but we also work very closely with the local development districts, so they're all good sources to go to for potential funding activities. Our funds go to public entities and nonprofits only, though, not to a private company or a private individual.
Yes, ma'am.
I just wondered, if you're in your community, what's the expectation that the current ISP providers would want to participate in this? Will AT&T has their own network, would this be something they also would want to be part of? Would you go to those that currently exist in your community to have a discussion, or are we really talking about, new things in every community? Now, obviously, that's a pretty big question.
It's a big question, and there's a lot of, I see a lot of folks in the audience today that are already participating in fiber to the home. And certainly they are very aware of the hurdles that they have, the obstacles in getting adoption rates where they want it to be, but not from a lack of effort on their part, where they built out fiber to the home, either using state dollars or federal dollars to get those things done.
But I think this will augment any business. I mean, any ISP provider, this should augment their business.
Because it's open to.
Right.
Yeah, and you're for a long time. I'm gonna get you this time.
Is there any discussion on possibly creating some sort of community center? In big cities, there are often places where you can go and rent like a cubicle. And if this is going to be a problem, get it to the home. So we want to be able to
Actually, there is, and we looked at a couple of different things. Community action agencies and libraries are probably the two most prevalent ones. We've got Kenny Burdan sitting here that helped City of Nicholasville and Jessamine County bring in one of those exact models into their library so that anybody that did not have internet access could come in and do their homework, do whatever it is they want to do into the library. So those are natural places where folks will go to get information or share information. So yes, there is a plan to try to do those kind of things. We want to do a lot of education workshops too that talks about where you can go to find access or find the resources that you might need.
Libraries generally have a limit though, like 20 minutes at a time or something like that. I'm talking like if somebody wanted to run a business, they would need, you know, hours so they could.
We've actually talked to some incubators that are interested in this technology, but there's still a lot of discussion to be held on that one. But yes, all good suggestions.
That's also a strategy that would be such a good thing at the local level, for the local community to drive, because if the fiber is coming into the community and the community wants to enable local small businesses and business development, an incubator can be a remarkably high return, low cost strategy. But that's likely to be on a community by community or regional basis as opposed to driven centrally.
I'll just add very quickly too that right now in Eastern Kentucky, in fact, there's a program called Digital Works. We're a part of that, and that creates work facilities, telework facilities in partnership with ECCEP, Jeff Whitehead's group. And we're looking to potentially expand that model in this area as well, as hopefully the new bandwidth enables additional work at home activity.
We'll take the last question, then Lonnie's telling me we have to wrap up.
We talked about broadband and how that will spur economic development in the rural communities who maybe their population size can't support, 4 grocery stores, so the person has to work from home. And you all, Eric, mentioned that some of these communities in Kentucky already have fiber optic to the home, and I was just curious if we had any data, showing that when these go in, that we are seeing a spur in entrepreneurship or decline in unemployment rates or anything like that. Are we seeing any data from that, or is it kind of unknown?
We'll ask Joanne to take that, please.
So I'm not aware of any studies in Kentucky. I follow this pretty closely on a national basis. And there's a pretty significant academic body of work that shows that when you go from no broadband to some level of broadband, there's a real impact economically. And I think that body of work exists because we've got more than 15 years of data now just data being collected and information available. What we don't know yet, and where there hasn't been enough time to collect the data, is what happens when you go from a really low level of broadband, what we considered broadband 10 years ago, but the FCC wouldn't consider it anymore, and that really doesn't enable the kinds of big bandwidth stuff that the economy is dependent on. We don't know what happens when you go from that to really big broadband, the Google Fiber type stuff. And there just hasn't been enough time or studies to show what that looks like. I think intuitively, we all know, because we're sitting here in the room, and we know that this is going to enable telehealth and distributed development and home-based work, business creation, and all of those things. But there's not a lot in the way of research or studies. In 10 years, we'll know a lot more than we do now. But this is a big challenge, because if we have to wait for the studies before we can act, and these are big investments at the local level, so it would be very helpful if we had a whole lot of that research, but we really don't yet. What we do know is that our competitor communities and cities and our competitor nations are building this infrastructure at a very, very rapid rate, and they clearly think it's important to their economic future, and aren't waiting for the studies. So that's one way to think about it, although I'd feel better if there were 30 studies out there that really showed what the numbers are, because it would justify the investment in a way that would be much more quantifiable than where we are now.
We have a real-world example in our audience here. And Keith, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but Keith Gabbard in Jackson and Owsley County has 100% fiber to the home. But his take rates are still low. But Keith, can you talk a little bit about his question? Once you got 100% penetration, what did it do to your 2 counties?
Well,
Part of my answer would be exactly what you just said. We just now got to 100%, and we've not had it long enough to really get a lot of data. So we had sales before, so we had low speed internet. We've had that for 10 years to every home. So it's basically going from, you know, 3 to 6 meg up to now they get 100 meg a gig. And it's happening so fast, I don't really see an impact. But we do have what Eric was just talking about, digital. We have the training center in Anvil, Teleworks USA, that is training people, and people are starting to work from home and based on the broadband availability. You know, in the last 6 months, they've created like 27, 28 jobs that people are working from home, which is not much for a big city, but where I live, it's pretty important.
It is. Anvil population 5, right? I mean, it's
Again, the jury's still out, but I have to think it's got to help. Or at least that's the message I'm trying to get out of where I go.
And another thing in Keith's situation there is the potential to grow, because there are some businesses that are doing some aerospace work and competing in that, and I can tell you, they wouldn't even be considering his community if he did not have that kind of capacity. So that's still materializing in terms of, well, already retained some jobs, but that kind of potential wouldn't even be possible if Keith hadn't taken the risk and done right.
So Lonnie, what we're trying to tell everybody is we've already got what everybody else is wanting a few years ahead of time. Come to us.
Keep spreading the word, Keith, I agree.
So I have just one comment, just very quickly. Before, I know we're about ready to wrap up, but we're talking about resources for communities earlier. I want to do a small commercial for Connected Nation. ConnectMyCommunity.org is the program that is a self-assessment benchmark that we work with communities to rank themselves against the National Broadband Plan standards. So it's ConnectMyCommunity.org. That's another body of resource that we hope that is free and available. We hope certainly any communities that would find that useful might visit that website as well.
Yeah, I'll do a commercial for both Eric and Joanne. And if you're a community leader out here today, I would encourage you to take a few minutes to either after the session today or sometime today to reach out to them and figure out how to get started, because both of them have a wealth of information about the first step to help the community get to where you want to be. And as Brian said, we have a lot of information on our website. Certainly visit. We're trying to, as fast as we get information about federal grant opportunities and conversations with Mark and ARC and other folks, that we put that material out. Thank you. So we've got to get you on to your next session.
Well, you want to do as well.